I'm sure you guys are aware of that story in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus is talking about him going to the cross, essentially being killed and rising on the third day, and how Peter, when he looked at him in verse 22, he said, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." And then, of course, that famous line, verse 23, where he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." And I read that and just was really struck by how that verse is so applicable to people in our time. And what I mean by that is there's so many of us that have a calling and they have a desire to do the work of the Lord and things that are mindful of the things of God. And people are living these callings out day to day and in whatever fashion that doesn't even make sense to many people. But yet a lot of us are having things and having thoughts that are of men. And imagine if Jesus for a moment took Peter's advice and said, "Oh, you're right. Oh, you're right, Peter. I'm so sorry. What am I thinking? I thought that I had to go die on the cross and be raised again from the third day. I'm so sorry. Thank you for rebuking me, Peter, because you had such clarity in your thought." Imagine if Jesus did that, right? Obviously, history would have been totally different, and Christ's purpose in life would not have been what it was, and the rest is history there. But Jesus knew what his calling was, what his role was, and how he stood firm for that. But more, I guess, alarmingly, it's Peter who had a moment that was so different from what was of Christ, such that even Jesus had told him, "Get behind me, Satan." Like, it's not like, "Oh, hey, Peter, I just want to kind of correct you here and let me just clarify some things." It was literally the 180-degree turn, and it was, "Get behind me, Satan." And if you think about what that means with the example that I mentioned with modern day examples, there's so many of us that are living our lives for Christ, and you witness other people living their life for Christ, but because oftentimes we kind of get into this flip-flop mentality of, oh, we're living, in the presence of God, and then suddenly the next kind of moment we have a moment of a "get behind me, Satan." And Peter wasn't some bad guy, right? He wasn't some dude that was out to get Jesus like maybe Judas was, right? But he had a moment in his life where he didn't understand the things of God. And there's many of us living our lives right now rebuking and pointing fingers and being the loudest voice in the room and trying to use reason and rationale and telling people, hey, far be it from you, insert name, "This shall not happen to you." Hey, far be it from you. You can't do that. That's not what God would want. No, you can't go suffer and die and do this and that. But sadly, many of us who are listening to people that have these, "Get behind me, Satan" moments, they're listening to these people, and instead of fulfilling their calling, they're going out and they're doing things that are not of the ways of God, because God had called them. God had brought something that was to their attention that was mindful of the things of God, but then they succumbed to and they were influenced by the things of men, namely by modern day, Peters, who had these blip moments that were "get behind me, Satan" moments. And so I want to encourage people, because so many of us are on either side of the fence. If you were to just put yourself in Jesus's shoes, who had a firm understanding of his calling, he wasn't wavered. But many of us, we have a calling similar to Jesus where we have to go out and do whatever it is that we got to do. But you can't be wavered by people who are rebuking you and giving you even the best logic. And of course, you got to be in tune with the Lord constantly so that you know what your calling is, you know what the Lord is convicting you of. But just because somebody comes around the corner and is testing you, similar to how Satan tempted and tested Jesus in the desert, and even arguably in this case, Satan, right? And I'm not going to go into the detail of whether Peter was possessed or this and that. There's theological debate there. But really, the moment is still clear. Peter had a moment where he was turning away from what the Lord wanted because his flesh got in the way. And so you got to ask yourself, if you're in Peter's shoes, if you're a guy who is constantly just thinking, yeah, I believe I have the ways of the Lord, but really you're having the ways of man, because when you rebuke somebody or do things for different people, you may be in a moment where you're telling somebody, whether it's your neighbor, your brother, your brother or sister at church, or whoever it is, and you're telling them, hey, far be it from you, but really you're having the ways of man. And so just want to encourage you guys, because the best way to do that, really, if you are in a position of where Peter is you got to evaluate, where is it that your flesh is just extending over. If you feel your lack of self-control, your lack of humility, to really stop yourself and say, man, Lord, and just even praying before, Lord, before I say these words, before I tell Jesus or somebody that's a follower of Christ, far be it from you. Before you utter words of rebuke, before you utter words of correction, just kind of contain yourself, right? And just say, man, Lord, is this really something that's of Satan, or is it something that is, and to be honest, it could be a good thing too. Maybe you're rebuking in the right way, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't rebuke or you shouldn't call things out, but you have to ask yourself, is this the way of God or is this the way of man? And I think a lot of that, the Holy Spirit can reveal that to you as you are praying and just really trying to control your emotions, you're controlling your mindset. And it's not even, sometimes it doesn't even have to be logical. Like dying on the cross and being raised on the third day, Peter didn't understand that. And there are some things where you may not be able to understand, like why would this person, why would my son want to go to this college versus that college? Why would my son or my brother want to go into this ministry or that ministry? His talent is here, and it only makes sense that he does this. And if he makes a mistake, then I don't think that's the way of man. If he suffers, I don't think that's the way of God. I'm sorry, but really you got to ask yourself. It doesn't have to make sense. Like for Peter, in his perspective, Jesus dying on the cross and being 3 days in that way, and then rising again on the third day, it didn't make sense to Peter. And so sometimes things don't make sense. Like somebody's calling, somebody's path doesn't make sense. And so you just gotta watch yourself, right? If you are on either side of that fence, you don't want to be caught up with being rebuked and saying, oh, you're right, what was I thinking? No, I'm so sorry, what was I thinking? And similar to Jesus, if he would have succumbed to that, obviously things would have been much different. But sadly, a lot of people are succumbing to the criticism or correction or different things around them, and they're changing their calling, they're changing their job, they're changing their actions, they're changing their outlook, their belief, their ideology, just because somebody said, far be it from you, and they didn't even pray about it. And again, if you are in a position where you are being corrected or rebuked, or somebody's giving you a different opinion, you should also pray about it and just say, Lord, these people are telling me these things, it sounds rational, but is this something that you are giving me, though it may look and sound irrational? It doesn't make sense that I would die and be raised again on the third day, or something similar, right? Something outrageous, but it doesn't make sense. So much so that I have to tell somebody to tell the other person, hey, I'm sorry, but this is how the Lord is convicting me. And you don't have to say, Satan, get behind me, but you just say, hey man, I appreciate your concern, your thoughts, but I really believe the Lord is convicting me and wanting me to do this in this way. So I just want to encourage people, because so many people in this world are having these moments, these Satan get behind me moments. And whether you're on the receiving end or you are giving it to somebody else, it's still a problem, because only God knows, the ultimate calling and the ultimate path that he has for every single person. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. Jesus dying on the cross, rising on the third day, at the time, having not witnessed that and the outcome of that, it didn't make sense for Peter. It doesn't make sense sometimes. But if you have a constant dialogue, this constant communion with Christ, in prayer and being in tune with the Holy Spirit, I do believe that you can have a sense of faith in saying, okay, I'll step back. I'm not going to tell this guy, far be it from you, but instead I'm just going to let them live their life and see how God takes them in that way. And it won't make sense, but to God it makes sense. And just want to encourage you guys with that, because it's a big problem right now in all ways, whether it's at the individual life level on day-to-day decisions, or whether it's at the high level in terms of someone's lifelong calling, in terms of some big picture movement that's going on in the world. So God bless you guys, and be encouraged, and I'll talk to you guys soon.